Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 189 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am still here in Lander, Wyoming, where we have been hustling hard every single day. Lana and I have maybe been the most productive in the last week than we ever have. Just yesterday, a semi-truck pulled up in front of the house, luckily not when the elementary school across the street was letting out, and delivered all the rest of our boulder bags and crag kits. So those are in stock and are shipping right now. Check those out on the website at powercompanyclimbing.com/essential-elements. And the fruits of that hustle will be coming very soon. We've got so many big things going on that I don't even know where to start. So I'm not going to try and start. Instead, I'm going to tell you a little about today's guest, Mario Stanley. Mario and I first met in Columbia, Maryland at a coaching seminar, and we ran into each other at Waco Tanks at the Rock Rodeo maybe a year later. And where I am normally a quiet, stoic observer, at least in general situations, Mario is more boisterous. Let me get in the middle of it. He's got a big voice, and I appreciate his energy so fucking much. And I had talked with Mario online quite a bit, but last year, in the wake of the George Floyd murder in May, Mario and I struck up a friendship, and we've spent quite a bit of time forging that relationship. And in fact, we met each other in Denver during the pandemic, trying to be as responsible as we could to record a bunch of podcast interviews, some of which you have heard here, some of which you can hear at his podcast, Sins and Suffers. And we actually recorded that first conversation when I walked into the house, hugs, sat down, drank whiskey, and recorded this conversation, which one of us will likely, maybe both of us will put out on our podcasts, because honestly, it's not often we get to hear two adult men creating a friendship. That sounds so fucked up to say, but it's true. It's this strange dance that we do as men, and Mario and I come from two different backgrounds with a few things in common, and we bonded over the things in common plus the different backgrounds, and I think that's so important. Today, however, we're going to talk about coaching. Mario does a lot of work with youth climbers, particularly in a feeder team for Team Texas, which is one of the most storied climbing teams in the history of the U.S. And as someone who doesn't work as often with youth climbers, though a lot of you listeners do, I wanted to talk to Mario about what it is that goes into helping these kids get ready to be the best climbers that they can be. Let's get into it.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time.
What you do need to do is make rock climbing fun, obnoxiously stupid, silly, to the point where you don't even take yourself seriously fun.
Power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
Yep.
Do you think Texas is like gym hotbed because there's such limited cool weather and not a ton of outdoor climbing in the like big city hubs?
I would definitely say indoor sports in general rule. Like Dallas, DFW actually has quite a bit of indoor tennis courts, which I didn't know. I mean, I knew were a thing, but like I didn't know that they were like this abundant. And so, yes, mainly because it is so hot. Like like that's the thing. Like I don't even think like the lack of climbing destinations is really the issue because we have a couple of things like 3 hours driving. You can get anywhere, and I know that's like crazy for anybody else, but honestly, it's so hot. I mean, it is like I want to say last year when we had the days of rain, we then proceeded to have over 60 or 75 days of 100-degree weather plus.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just miserable unless you're like willing to get an alpine start every day, but no one wants to do that.
Yeah.
At least I do.
How did you get started with the feeder system you're in, the coaching situation that you're in? How did all that come about?
So I got started rock climbing. Well, okay, so let's back up. My very first experience rock climbing was on a date. And a current girlfriend of mine, I was trying to plan something fun for us to do. We went rock climbing. She hated it. I liked it. Needless to say, she was no more. And rock climbing stuck around. So that is what got me into it as a sport. And then honestly, I kind of like did it a couple times. I volunteered at a local gym called Stoneworks, which is still around to this day. It's a grain silo. The people who own and run that gym are super sweet people. It is definitely known as I like to call it the climatization gym because whatever temperature it is outside is whatever temperature it is in there because it's an old grain silo.
Sure. So
I started volunteering my time to work behind the desk for a free membership. And this is when you could do that. So
how old were you then?
Oh, man. So let's see. I'm 36 now. It's 2020. I moved to Texas in 2000, the year of 2003 going into 2004, or 2004 going into 2005. I'm pretty sure it was 2003. So I want to say I was like 20, maybe 20, just about to turn 21, if my math is correct. Sorry. If anybody's listening to this, correct my math, but I don't care. But I want to say I was somewhere around the ages of like 19 to 20, 21 tops. Because I don't think I was drinking yet then, because it really didn't appeal to me, honestly. But yeah, that's when I got started. And I was just a kid washing holds with muriatic acid. If anybody remembers washing holds that way, I had set a couple routes, and that's when you had to take a rotary hammer drill a hole into the wall, drop the sink in, and then you could put the hold in, or the hold was just a permanent fixture. And then we also had to drill in pockets and cracks along those walls. And that was my very first experience, that's how I thought commercial rock climbing gyms are supposed to run. Thank God they don't run like that anymore.
Yeah, totally.
But that was my very first like introduction into climbing. And then from there, I took a little bit of a hiatus just because I left school on a personal note, and I was kind of like, I was like, I want to say I was like 22 at the time, 23. And I just didn't really know where I fit in the world and what I wanted to do. And I think that's also because I wasn't really okay with what made me happy. Like I wasn't like, I just wasn't thinking about myself in the perspective of like what I needed to be happy. And that's like, and then when I went back to climbing, I finally like rediscovered climbing like maybe like 5-6 months later. I was like, oh, this makes me really happy. And then so I just stuck with it from there. And then
what were you focused on instead of what makes you happy?
I was focused on, honestly, learning how to quiet the voices in the echo chamber. And I'll be honest with you, that's really what it was. It's kind of my own personal, like, you know, I don't want to say, like, I mean, I'm not trying to say like mental illness per se, but like everyone goes through mental struggles.
Sure.
And that was a point in my life where I had absolutely no self-confidence. And I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I was considering moving to Portland. I was considering moving to, you know, Seattle. I was thinking about moving to Canada. I was just like thinking about all this stuff because I realized I wanted to escape the situation that I was in, and I couldn't. And honestly, I didn't have a reason in my mind to escape the situation that I was in because it wasn't really that bad. It just wasn't what I wanted. And I think what I needed and what I ended up learning how to do in that whole time frame is just calm my own inner demons and just accept that like these feelings are normal. These feelings are real. I'm not the only one who have these feelings. I'm not the only one who has, you know, doubts, insecurities, just like, you know, feeling like you're a waste of space every once in a while. Like, I mean, like that happens, but I just, you know, I think when you're young, you think all of these thoughts are only happening to you and your brain.
Totally. It seems very solitary, very lonely. And I think a lot of us go through this phase where it's like the grass is greener in every direction. Like I'm standing on this path, this patch of scorched earth. It's, you know, nothing can grow here. And everywhere else I look, it's better.
Yeah. Which is not really the case.
Yeah, but it's a tough place to be in your head, you know? And I went through a period of, and still struggle with, frankly, you know, the way that a lot of men have been conditioned to feel like they have to be the provider. You have to be constantly working. If you're not working 80 hours a week, you're not doing enough. You know, that whole struggle is something I still have to battle, and I don't give enough priority to the things that make me happy.
You said a very interesting statement of like what men are supposed to be. And I remember a comment that I started telling people, the people that I was really close with after coming out of that spell. And I remember it's like, as men, I feel like we're programmed to, you know, maybe, you know, and this might be like, you know, historically, meaning like, you know, all the way back to our great ancestors. But I feel like we're always supposed to think that we're supposed to slay a dragon.
Yeah.
Could defeat a giant, win a war, do something big. And when you're not doing that, and whatever you perceive that thing to be or that actions to be, you go into this spiral. And I think that was what I was struggling with. Like I felt like I was supposed to be doing something big, and you know, I just had the wrong B word. I wasn't trying to be doing something big. I was supposed to be building.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately, eventually, when I built into enough to myself. And I think that's where a lot of my like true, like kind of a like effort attitude towards a certain amount of like, I don't know, debauchery or just whatever crap people give you, I just stopped caring. Yeah. A lot. And I think that was really powerful. So, but yeah, so that was that time. And then I got a job at Whole Earth. Also, I got a job at the climbing gym. Worked at Whole Earth, and it's just like a small version of REI. Oh, okay. But they're a mom and pop version. They're really cool. They're actually a little shout out to those guys because I work for them and they're really great. But they also they're known for having the best toy section of like real toys and children's books in all of DFW. And when I was working,
that's really cool, actually.
Yeah, and when I was working on ship, I always used to read the children's books. I used to get in so much trouble, but I would just be there reading these books for hours. And people were like, "We need help with shoes," and I'm just like, "I'm almost done. I just got to figure out where the duck goes."
What happens to the duck? I can't put the book down now.
Yeah, so it was super fun, and working in that store really gave me kind of like made me be silly again a little bit in that, at least in that department, and just like I don't know, it's the nicest thing I remember about that job.
Why did the store have that section? Like you don't really see outdoor stores that cater to children.
I think this is much more like Whole Earth, maybe not their flagship one in Austin, but like Whole Earth as a company has always been, I like to call them like the real mom and pop outdoor shop. And, you know, your real mom and pop outdoor shop is one of those things like like the whole earth would probably do great in Laramie because, you know, what do? Oh, I need to figure out a science experiment for my child. I would take parents over like, all right, we have this butterfly catching kit. We can talk about like, you know, then it teaches you like you can teach the kids about metamorphosis. You can do all this stuff, but it was really good at providing educational resources for the outdoors, but it also allowed parents to get toys, games, books, anything else that kind of helped break that barrier to get outdoors. And then they provided the normal things like clothing, apparel for mostly adults. They did have things for kids, shoes, climbing gear. Not much for climbing gear, just because it wasn't as popular. They did a lot of packs. Obviously, in Dallas, they sell a lot now. And then when I worked there, I was like heavily pushing them to sell more. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's like kind of it. Like it's a real genuine mom and pop outdoor store. And, you know, they might not have the grand selection that the big box has, but it doesn't mean they can't get it. But like if you have a family and you're looking for things to do and you really want to like keep your kids engaged, I mean, that's the place to go. So.
Yeah, I want to come back to that eventually, but you were like, you're working at the climbing gym, you're working at this outdoor store, you're kind of jumping feet first wholeheartedly into the outdoor industry. Was that something you were involved in before you came to Texas?
No, not at all. I mean, you know, if we're going to shoot straight from the hip, you know, I grew up in a town called Manassas, Virginia, right outside of DC. You know, my school was called Stonewall Jackson. I used to play in the battlefields of Manassas, where that battle happened. And if you would have asked me when I was growing up as a kid, I mean, I always aspired to do great things, but I also had accepted the reality that like, you know, I might have some like mediocre management job somewhere, or I might be like a store manager somewhere. And then, you know, just trying to manage not having too many kids. Like I really and I know that might sound bad, and I'm not trying to rip on anybody else's reality, but like I wanted more, but I also growing up, I accepted that like, it's okay for me just to like, you know, sell weed and work at a shitty store.
Yeah. Which makes your patch of scorched earth that much more infuriating.
Yeah. And I think that's the part of, I think that also that concept, that notion is also what I was wrestling with, because even though I accepted that bad reality, it was still like comforting because I knew that like that was a reality. But then I had so much disdain towards it when I was going through that time. Like I hated it so much. And yeah, I think it made me hate myself a little bit because I couldn't figure out mentally how to get past it until I did. And then,
yeah. So why the outdoor industry? What about that drew you in?
I'll be honest with you, people were just cool. And like, you know, and we kind of talked about On the Level yesterday. And I like what, you know, Montserrat and Bethany both said about being on the level. It's like, it's that eye thing. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, you can look and you look at someone and then you immediately bond and like they see you. But I think also another thing about like being on the level was like, you just can hold intelligent discourse conversations. You can hold conversations with people and you can have that, like, I guess, mental sparring, for the lack of a better term. Like, it's not a fight and we're not trying to debate, but that was the first place I met adults and people my own age that were willing to have conversations outside of the spectrum of just what we did in Dallas. You know, what bar did you go to? What this? Oh, I'm into this music. I'm into this. You know, this is the first time someone was like, yeah, I did this hike. And it really reminded me of this experience that I had. I did this hike in Colorado. This customer, I forget what, I sold them this is actually what I learned what Chacos were. But I sold them a set of Chacos. And they were telling me how these shoes work for a hike they did in Colorado. And they're going to do the same kind of hike in Spain. And I was like, why are you going to Spain to hike? And it was at that moment where they're like, well, I want to go to some museums. I want to go do this. And then I'm also going to try and like take these classes. I'm thinking about going abroad. And it was just like, I knew what abroad was, but then it was at that moment I was like, oh, the outdoors and travel can lead you to meeting other people. Cause that's like the only other thing I had, like meeting new people, immersing myself in like their cultures. I learned a lot. But then once I started doing things outdoors, I realized I could do that and be self-sufficient. Like I could have, house and home and kitchen on my back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty liberating thought. Even though I don't camp and hike a lot, it was still very liberating.
Yeah. Recently I've been kind of questioning how I got so comfortable in this like complacent climbing industry that I have been involved in, that just feels safe, it feels very safe, and a lot of vanilla,
Yep.
a lot of very plain safety. And while, early on when I was standing in my patch of scorched earth looking out and everything was greener, it seemed very exciting. But it also provided this like predictability, because I knew that a lot of the people I encountered would all have the same sort of views and interact with the world in a similar way. And then when you go to OR, you don't even have to walk in and every white dude's going to be wearing a button-up plaid short sleeve shirt.
Yeah.
It's just super predictable. And there's an element of that feels really secure when you're nervous about what you're going to find when you try to step into that greener grass and you're trying to build something bigger, where it feels like you're stacking up Jenga blocks that might topple over,
Yeah. No, I do.
And it's just an element of the outdoor industry I'd never really thought of, how predictable people are.
Yeah, I mean, it's safety. Your feeling, I think, is correct. It's like safety in numbers. It's like, the one gazelle that goes outside of the pack and sees some nice green grass gets eaten by the lion. So, like, I definitely understand that feeling. And and obviously that it wasn't the same for me. However, I do have to take my attitude into and I know I bring this up, but I also think it's a really big blessing, because it had just allowed me to kind of be a bull and just go for it. You talk about going to OR, and for me, it was very much that same experience. Like, okay, everybody dresses pretty much the same. Everybody has the same kind of look. Everybody has the same kind of vibe, the same kind of talk. And then my first thought to myself was like, okay, so let's go back to high school here. So everybody that I'm looking at is everyone is wearing a Letterman jacket. So where are the kids that hang out at the back end near the water fountain?
Right.
And that's the first thing I started looking for.
Yeah.
Because I saw that and I was like, and me personally, I'm like, okay, I can navigate this space. That's fine. I've been navigating white spaces my whole life. Like, navigating this space is not going to be as challenging as long as I can, find an ally and someone to help me. And my buddy Moss, also known as Gallo, was the person who kind of really plugged me in. He's actually the person who introduced me to Beyond Clothing, my sponsors. And if it wasn't for him, I would have never met these guys. So he plugged me in. And he's actually the person who got me into OR my very first time. Like, he was like, yeah, I'll get you a badge. I'll help you out. I'll let you do your thing. And he kind of gave me like the full lowdown of like, when you're navigating, these are the places you want to go. This is where you get your free food. This is how you get free swag. This is how you do this. And then he gave me some very important advice. He's like, and when you find someone you want to network with, he was like, text message them and email them immediately, like right in the middle of the conversation. Like, don't wait. Because at the end of the day, he's like, they're going to forget you. You're a small fry. Like, you don't matter. So you have to figure out how to make yourself stand out. And he was like, get as many contacts as you can. Like, some people will tell you to just get 3, but get as many as you can, and then just take what you can, that like whoever bites back, go for it. And it was with that advice that I spent a lot more time like really hunting around. That's how I ended up meeting James with the Joy Project.
Yep, James Edward Mills.
And then I ended up meeting my buddy Darren, who is he worked for, I think he still does work for Polartec, and he's the only brother I've ever met in the textiles industry. And he said recently he had met another one, so we were super excited talking about that. And then shortly thereafter, a few ORs later, Bethany started coming into the scene. But kind of talking in that world, like, there were such few people that I met I think Heather Larson is a person that I reconnected with. I actually knew her she's a big slackliner. I knew her from her days in Dallas. But it was funny. It was like the athletes and people of color. And when I say this, I don't want to sound offensive in any way, shape, or form, but I think this is just the nature of the business. You have A-list celebrities, you have B-list celebrities, you have A-list climbers and athletes, and you have your B-list climbers. And I felt like I connected both. It connected best with people who fall in that B and C category, because your A-list people, it doesn't matter what sport they do, every brand wants a piece of them. So, and so once I kind of started networking with people like that started making OR seem a little bit more real and tangible. Because if I would have just had to bro out with category A, like there's just the jocks, it would have never happened.
Yeah.
Like it just wasn't as fun. And, as you're talking about, like, you have like-mindedness, you understand that. I had no clue what half of them were talking about. And I know they were talking about climbing and know that, but the way they would approach it or their experiences, it made sense. Just because it makes sense didn't mean it related to me, and I could respect it for what it was. And I had those conversations, but on the flip side of it, it was like, okay.
So how do you go from like getting involved in this outdoor industry where you're seeing the possibilities of that to now I'm working with youth teams? How does that transition happen? And not even a transition, it's just another thing because you're still working in the outdoors through your guiding company.
Yeah. So it's funny. I look at it. So I have to look at it as like, it's all underneath the same hat, no matter what. Like if it's rock climbing related, whether it's indoor or outdoors, it's all underneath the same hat. So coaching, let's like kind of jumping backwards in time here. Coaching actually happened because I quit my job at Whole Earth Provision. I wasn't working there anymore. I full-time working at the gym. I borrowed my buddy Kenzie's car. I got into a small fender bender. I couldn't afford to pay him back. So I just told him like, hey, I will work for you in Kids Club. And then I'll work a couple shifts where, that you can just have the day off and I'll just, do the extra work. And that was a commission-based job. So I basically worked extra to pay off his car. And then our Kids Club program is basically ages like youngest, at that time it was kind of looser, but realistically youngest 5, oldest I had is up to 11. And kids were just rad. They were like really fun to work with. And when I finally paid off what he owed me, what I owed him, he was just like, hey, I don't even want to do this job anymore. Do you want to just keep on coaching? And it's like yours. Like you make all the money that comes with it. You make everything. It's your program. You do whatever you want to do. And I was like, at first I just didn't have another job and I needed money. And I was like, yeah, sure. Then I was like, this is kind of fun. And then it honestly wasn't until I started getting into the program, running the numbers, growing the program. I was like, oh, I can make a living doing this. And and that's when I was like, I can make a full-time living being a coach if I'm strategic about this. Like if I make a plan on like how to like diversify the program, create levels, as any business owner does. You want to figure out how to maximize your services that you provide. And so that was the moment that I realized that I wanted to be a coach, and I've kept doing it ever since. And then, you're talking about the outdoor industry as OR and going to a coach, like they're symbiotic, but they're also, I think they're on two very different paths. Yeah. And I think these paths they have intersections throughout my life, but for the most part, there are two very different paths.
Yeah. And that was at Stone.
That was actually at Dallas Rocks.
Dallas Rocks
before Summit bought the gym, because Summit was based in Grapevine.
Gotcha.
And then I think in 2007, Summit slowly started to acquire all the gyms in the DFW area that were interested in selling.
And at the time when Summit is buying up these gyms, Team Texas was already kind of a
they were already a force. Yeah, they were already a phenomenon.
And something that I've always admired watching Team Texas from afar, partly because I pay attention to what's going on in the climbing world, partly because I was a climber in the red, and partly because I was emceeing for like divisionals and regionals, things like that. And at the time, Team Texas was in the same region or in the same division as Ohio.
It was the Heartland, I think is what it was called. The Heartland District, which was massive.
It was huge. So they
was
would
like the center of the
travel.
state.
They would travel to Cincinnati to compete. And so I would MC these things for Team Texas when like Future was competing, and
oh yeah, forgot about Future. I haven't seen
there
him
were
in
there were
forever.
just all these kids who were crushers
Just
for
monsters.
Team Texas.
Yeah.
And something I've always admired is that I knew they would go do these big outdoor trips as a team.
Short trip and long trip. Yeah.
Yeah, every year. And even though they were this indoor climbing powerhouse, they were still taking the kids outside and teaching them how to be outside. Did you get involved? Like, did you stick with it, hoping to join in with that? Did you stick with it just because it was a job at the time? When Summit was coming in and taking over, how did that feel to you?
So honestly, and there was the current management system that existed in Dallas Rocks was just unsustainable. Like, it's just like what, with great respect to the people that were involved, and there were some really good players involved in that whole process and that whole thing. But ultimately, with the management process that was at Dallas Rocks, that gym was doomed to fail.
I think a lot of early gyms were. They were.
Yeah. I mean, it's just they were climbers, not businessmen.
Yeah.
Or they were climbers that were unwilling to become businessmen.
Right.
Because they still wanted, I think I said this on literally every single podcast I've ever been on, especially my own and yours. Like, rock climbing is an ego-based sport, and they could not separate themselves from having to just do the job. And I cannot remember what his name is, but I met a coach one time from Israel. And this was maybe like 10 years ago, maybe 11 or more. But he was in the gym, and he was just there, and he was kind of climbing and coaching, but he was also working with an athlete that he had that was there. They were just in town for whatever reason. And it was talking to him. He was like, I run the main team in Israel. And I wish I remember his name, but this was so long ago. But he said a statement to me that I'll never forget. He was like, it was like 3 of us or 4 of us that really opened up the climbing gyms there. And it just came to the grand conclusion that one of us has to quit climbing and become an adult. And one of us has to quit climbing and run the gym and be a business person. So I started coaching and running the gym. And he's, and he was like, I'm finally going to get back into it. But he's like, the other 3 guys are no longer involved. And I think that was the problem with that gym. It's just like, and as we said, all early gyms. But I was not concerned for my job or anything when they were going to hire the gym, because my track record shows for itself. I have, I'm not one to brag about myself a lot. I like to just, fly underneath the radar and boast when I need to, and stay down when I don't need to, or stay down when I can. But I have grown as far as recreational in any level of program, whether it be kids, like little kids programs, intermediate recreational climbing, and recreational competitive. I've grown the largest team in DFW, and I've grown the fastest consistently. And that's because I take the job seriously. It's a career of mine. And so I've always had a good consistent track record. And I'll never forget, my boss walked up to me and shook my hand. He was like, I don't know how you did it, but you were literally running your little kids program, your youth program with I had 80 kids in that program alone. And like my youngest program. And to me, anybody who's getting into coaching, your little program is the most important program in the whole gym. Like, you can talk about Rec Team Texas all you want to, but those programs are irrelevant if you don't have a program that's catered for kids from the ages of 6, really 5, all the way up to 8 or 9. Like, that's fundamentally the most important program. And
Why? Why is that the most important?
I mean, you got to have legacy. I mean, think about it this way. How much does a gym membership cost? Just ballpark.
I actually have zero clue.
What?
I haven't bought a gym membership since 1997.
Oh, you lucky dog. Okay, so, let's just say for the sake of conversation, and we're going to X out New York, LA, Chicago, any place that's like uberly expensive. An average gym membership is going to cost you somewhere between the ballpark of, on the low end of the spectrum, probably $60 a month. On the high end of the spectrum, let's just say $100 flat. So that's the basic gym membership. Okay. Now you have a youth program membership. Depending on your youth programs, it can be anywhere as low as $40 a month of what I've seen, all the way up to $125, $200 a month. And this is for recreational programs too. Which, in my opinion, I mean, that's a little steep. But okay, so you have that. Now let's take in basic gear, shoes, harness, all that stuff. For a kid package, we're going to say $100. Kids' little harness shoes are cheap. All right, so now that we've got that done, so we have our initial investment so far, and most gyms, if you're on the youth team, they give you a discount on your membership. So let's say we're going to add in on the high end of the spectrum. So we're going to say that $100 membership is just cut to $50, and we're going to say the kids membership is another $50. So it's $100 a month that the gym is charging that parent and that family, and that's, let's say, one kid. Okay, on average, it's usually more. Then you've just made an additional $100 on that kid's gear. Now that kid is 6 years old. My goal is to get him to graduate out of his program. I have gone to more high school graduations in the last few years, and I am hoping to get to go to a couple college graduations. And I know people who are getting ready to have families.
Yeah.
The entire lifetime of that kid per month, per gear, per everything coming through the gym, an average gym, if people would think about this, you will probably make close to almost $250,000 off of that kid and that family through the entire lifespan, from the age of like 5 all the way to 18. And it doesn't seem like a lot, and $250,000 doesn't seem like a lot. But when you have 60, 70 kids, 120 kids running through these programs and graduating out of it, well, now you have a sustainable business. And I think that from a business perspective, that's why I think most other gyms, when it comes to youth programs, utterly terribly fail. Because, not naming names, but anytime I travel, my first thing I like to do is go to a gym. And the very first thing I do is I usually quote unquote, get my day pass. I interview the employees, ask about their youth program, and then I ask to talk to the coach. And, I'll straight up lie. I'm like, I got a kid. I'm thinking about putting him in the program. I'm thinking about moving here. And I just like to hear what they say. And it's really remarkable how many people are so nonchalant about their program, and they're the head coach.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, you can kind of do this. And we kind of have this program. And in my mind, I'm like, my boss said this to me, a couple times, and it took me a while to get it, but you're leaving money on the table. And I just don't think people realize, if I get 40 kids psyched on rock climbing and I keep them psyched for the next 5 years, that is guaranteeing me bare minimum 40 kids at the math we just did. And let's say, you're making a percentage and whatever a good wage is. I mean, those 40 kids are at least guaranteeing you to have a good climbing trip every year.
Yeah. Yeah. And just providing you with a life, really,
Yeah.
And honestly, I see in a lot of gyms the most attention paid to the older, strong kids.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that's they should get paid some attention, but maybe that's a mistake, that
It is.
coaches are spending too much time paying attention to the older kids.
It is. I think it's a fundamental flaw because, for example, you know how to ride a bicycle. Do I really need to teach you how to ride your bike better? No, you're going to figure that out on your own. Kids, at a certain point, kids will coach themselves and teach themselves. because they want a project. They want to get on the hard routes. They want to work those things. So, and I'm not saying you don't need to have coachable moments and those like moments, and they don't need structure and they don't need good planning.
Yeah, there have to be nudges in the right direction.
Yeah. So let's throw that in the pot. Like, you're actually coaching your children. You know, you're doing the work. But do you really need to stay on top of a 15 or 14-year-old kid that's, you know, you've got a kick out of the gym?
Right.
No. What you do need to do is make rock climbing fun, obnoxiously stupid, silly, to the point where you don't even take yourself seriously, fun for kids from the age of 5 all the way up to like 9 or 10. Because this is the thing that I learned this year, because we have been launching a couple programs and talking to parents, and I've been trying to grow one of our Little Rockers program, which obviously COVID made it super hard. But that is for kids at the age of like 3 to 5, you know. And what I've learned from the dealing with these kids a lot is rock climbing's not cool to those kids. It's fun. It needs to be silly.
Right.
Rock climbing isn't cool until you're like 10 and you're able to just start like Googling what you want. And so kind of going back to like, why is it so important? It's because those kids need to be consistently inspired and consistently motivated that rock climbing is fun and it's something they want to do. And you're making these little nudges and showing that internal competition, complex, you know, comprehensive thinking about like what's going on, and having uncomfortable conversations with, you know, a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old, like explaining to them it's okay that you feel scared. You're supposed to. Now, you might not understand why you feel scared. And they're like, yes, I do. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, let's have this conversation. And 9 times out of 10, they're utterly wrong. But they still have the emotional complexity to understand how they feel. And your job as a coach is to validate that feeling, but then but immediately tell them, now that we have validated this feeling is, let's just say it's kindled for the fire. Like, you need to throw it in here and operate off of this thing and learn how to use this to your advantage to continue to have fun on the wall. Mm-hmm. And it turns to competition on their own accord, or they don't want anything to do with it.
And is this program part of the sort of feeder system into Team Texas?
Yes, it is.
So once a kid is, I don't know what time they become aware of the legend of Team Texas, but I'm sure you get kids who are
I get them all the time,
7, 8 years old, starting to really think about, I want to be on this team. You know, I want to wear this uniform. And how do you cultivate that and keep the fun? How does it not become too much about, I have to make the team, I have to be a competitive climber?
So I think this goes back to, you know, understanding that if you are a career coach or you are an hourly coach. So I think so I don't remember exactly where this phrase comes from, and I feel like my grandmother said it to me, or my dad did, Jamaican family, but a fish rots from the head. So you, as a coach, you must be having real talk conversation with your kids consistently. Because if you have a kid because by 10 is like, if they're going to compete, they need to start like being on a competitive team at the age of 10. Like, gotcha. Any later than that, like, they got to be a prodigy. And I know that sounds real jacked up, but gymnastics is the same way.
For sure.
And so with that being said, I think if you as a coach are not having consistent real talks with those kids as they're growing up, and by the time they get 9 or 10 years old and they start expressing that they want to be on Team Texas, and now you're trying to have a real talk, and now you're trying to have emotional conversations with these kids and lead them through what the emotional expectation is. Like, you might not make the team. You might make round 2 of tryouts. You might make it all the way to round 3 of that. Or, you know, or I tell the kids, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, I think you're strong enough to climb on the team, but your attitude sucks. And let's just like have a conversation. And I do tell a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old, I'm like, your attitude sucks. Exactly like that. And they look at me like, and I'm like, so let's unpack what I mean. you're rude to your teammates, you're a bully, you do these things, these are the examples that I'm talking about. Has coach so-and-so told you to stop doing this? Yes. How many does this coach have to tell you this every week? Yeah. And then you see their voice get a little smaller. Yes. Yes. No, I'm not, you can go to tryouts, but I'm not going to vouch for you. I'm not going to give you my own vouch. And if you make it on your own accord, great. But know that like, it's going to be real hard if you don't like, if you don't like working until the point where you're uncomfortable. If you don't, if you want to do the boulder right, then you're never going to do it right. You have to understand that like no one on team does it right. Everyone just does it to the best of their ability, and everyone else on team, when you get there, is going to look like they're doing it right, but they're all in the same point. Yeah. And I think, so that's like the thing. And I think in order to get a kid ready for that, you as a coach have to be in a mindset of like, I am trying to build a good human being, and I'm trying to have consistent conversations with these kids. So I don't have to figure out how to backpedal or just, I don't know. It's a terrible feeling. I guess that's one of the ways I look at it too. Like now thinking about it, I just don't ever want to be in a situation where I can't have an honest conversation with one of my kids. Yeah. Like that's just like, it kind of like, it's almost chagrining to me. Like it's very terrifying. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I just don't want to be in that situation. And I think as a good coach, like you have to be able to have those conversations with your kids.
Yeah. What are the top things you look for in that athlete who you're going to send to the team tryouts and you're going to vouch for them? What do those kids have that makes it so that you're excited to go to Kyle or whoever's running the team and saying, this kid's amazing. Yeah. Even if they're not the best athlete on team, they're a real asset to the team.
So the person I report to is Marissa. She was actually a team kid, and she's actually runs the team with Kyle now.
What's Marissa's last name?
Romero.
Oh, yeah. I definitely emceed comps that she was in.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Shout out to both of you too. I know you're on long trip with the kids, so have fun. So the first thing for me is attitude. Like I don't want to have to apologize to the head coaches of why this kid is a turd. Like all kids are turds to a certain extent, but like, there are kids who are just like, they're just not good team players, or there's a maturity level there, or it's things like that. So like attitude is the very first thing. Like you got to want to be here. And I'm not saying, you got to be the most politest kid in the entire world, but you've got to just show that you want to be there. Yeah. And I think that's the very first thing, because if not, they'll crack under the pressure. Second thing that I look for is, and this is kind of like, as your book is so appropriately named, The Hard Truth. If you are, and this is not always true, but if you are, I would say between the ages of 7 to 10, and you are not, and I understand these are adult boulders, but if you are not consistently projecting or putting down V4 and above, then I mean, in my opinion, you're going to get your butt kicked, because these boulders are hard. Because let's say the 11 to 13 category, when they're at their comps, their hardest rope route is like, I want to say like 12D, 12C.
Yeah.
And then, so the kids in the 14 and up, I mean, I think their hardest category at the top is like 13C.
I'm sure. I mean, we've seen 14-year-olds climb a lot of 514s at this point. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, so that's the first thing. So like being real and just like, listen, am I saying you got to be crushing 12s? No. Am I saying you got to be bouldering, V9, V10 in our gym, that's pink and black boulders, or purple and pink and black routes? Like, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is like, you need to be proficient enough at your rock climbing. And if you have to ask someone else if you're proficient enough at your rock climbing, then that's probably the first sign as an athlete. Like if an athlete has to ask if they're good enough to do it, then that's the first sign of them being aware of their climbing. And that's a good sign. Now I have to actually answer the question. And in my opinion, if you're not putting down like V4, V5 consistently, or at least be able to work the moves, more importantly, work the moves on those things at that age, then that's it. I think it's just kind of hard. And yeah, most kids just don't. I don't know. I think once it gets hard, they kind of shut down. So those are the things, and that grading system is probably really subjective.
Sure.
Like, so I'm not going to say like those are the cornerstone.
As soon as you
thing.
bring grades into the conversation, it's automatically extremely subjective.
Yeah. So like knowing that I've met a 9-year-old that I swear to God, it was almost as tall as me. And so, but so you have attitude, you have overall climbing ability. And then the last thing that I really look for, I guess it isn't like one last thing, but I look for the ability to ask questions and the ability to not just say yes. I personally, and I think this is just me being an East Coaster. I like it when kids challenge my authority.
Yeah.
I love it when they're just like, I don't think the boulder can go that way. I'm like, oh, well, why don't you tell me how the boulder can go? And then they'll tell me. And like, I got one kid, Sparky, great kid. It's not a real name, but all my kids have nicknames. So we got but Sparky will be very quick to tell me very quickly. She's like, well, I think it goes like this. And I'm like, all right, show me. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter that they will have that level of conversation with me is something that's good, because that means whether that kid cracks under the pressure when they're in a competition or not, that means I at least have the ability to talk them off of a cliff. And I think that's where real coaching begins. Some people just crack under pressure. Some people, they just need to know that you're in your corner, and then they'll do fine. And so those are really the big three things that I look for. And then if a kid it shows those three things, then I will generally say, I'm like, hey, I think you should try out for team. Like, we want all of our kids to try out for team. And I know that seems really counterintuitive, but I mean, there are sleepers, there are outliers everywhere. And
Sure.
I have definitely watched some of my kids try out. And then at tryouts, I'm like, who is this and where has this person been?
Yeah. And frankly, it's, even the best scouts in the biggest sports with the most money have a hard time looking at a person in practice and knowing how they're going to perform on the field. It oftentimes goes one direction or the other in an extreme that nobody expected. So having them try out, I think, is kind of a brilliant idea. Even if they don't make it, as morose as this may sound, I think it's good for people to try out for things that's not a sure thing for them.
Everyone needs to lose.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to feel everyone needs to feel the sting and the pain of being a loser. And I know no parent wants their child to be a loser, but you're looking at the loser in the sense of what you think MTV has taught us losers are.
Right.
But losers are actually the real winners in life. People who, it's biblical. Proverbs like get beaten down, get back up. I mean, it's beyond that. It's common sense. And I think that it's like I openly hate participation ribbons.
Oh,
and
me too, man.
everyone knows I hate them. And
bane of my existence.
God, and I'll get it for I'll also say this for kids 10 and under. Participation ribbons are definitely a good thing because they at least got something for showing up and they feel like they were a part of the team. That's different. And that's why I say under 10 and under, I'll let it slide. But anybody above, nah, man, you just got to feel the burn. And I don't know. I think most parents shelter their kids from losing in most things.
Oh, I think that's totally true. And I think we see a lot of kids become adults who bail at the first sign of struggle or loss and don't continue on, through those struggles into something that could be incredibly beautiful. Instead, they just bail because their parents just wanted them to be in things they were good at. And, losing is scary for a lot of parents.
But losing, I think when you lose, I can think of every track and field meet that I ever lost against a kid that I know I should have won. And the thoughts in the ride home, and my dad was awesome. My parents, my dad was definitely that side dad who would be screaming and yelling. You'd think he was so angry. He'd be like, get the ball. And then I'd come up to my dad and I was like, Dad, how'd I do? And he's like, you did great. Let's go get some ice cream.
Yeah.
And so he was super good about that. And
My dad was also very, very good about letting me sit in the car when I just needed to kind of have a quiet moment and reflect. And every time I lost those car rides, and I never lived that far from my middle school or high school. I mean, well, I guess if you can consider traffic in Northern Virginia is terrible, but those car rides seem so short going home, because I would be so lost in thought of like, man, I could have started off the blocks better. Maybe if I would have moved my block from, from 1, I should have moved it from 3 to 9 instead of 3 to 8. Like, I mean, and you think about these things as kids,
right?
But you only have these conversations if you fail.
Yeah.
And and controlled failure is not failure. I do want to make a actually very good point of that. And I'm kind of like beeline into something else here, but this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. And every coach who's a youth coach will probably thank me for this. Or if you're listening to this is definitely for you. But like, controlled failure is not the same as utterly failing. And there are a lot of parents or family people out there who want to mitigate of how the failure process is going to happen. And I've definitely had parents tell me, they're like, well, Mario, you get more with sugar than you do with shit. And I'm like, shit makes shit grow, fool. So like, move along. And that's just like me getting on a rant. And without like, the best example I can give of that is I had a parent who I was definitely being a little hard on their kid, but their kid showed a tremendous amount of promise. You could just tell that he was like wrestling with this thought of like, do I kind of like rage? And I want to say he was like 8 or 9 years old. And I just remember having these conversations. And the mom came up to me after practice one day and she was like, I really like you to back off of so-and-so. And I'm like, well, why? And they're like, well, they just talk about like, you're putting a lot of pressure on them, and you're really kind of like having these conversations, like, and they feel like they're failing you. And I'm like, well, that's not true. We have a conversation every day. Like, who do I care about the most? And they know it's them. And I'm like, I care about your feelings and I want you to try. And they know I don't care if you fail. I was like, you make me more proud if you fail on a boulder.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, I feel like it's a lot of pressure. And I wanted to be like, what you feel is not what your kid feels. So you need to get out of your kid's head and stop trying to control that conversation that's going on to him, because you are robbing him of the ability to critically think and analyze his own emotions. And most importantly, and I wish I could have said this to this mother, I was like, you are getting in the way of your child being able to learn how to speak up for themselves. And it just like, it infuriates me. And I have to kind of like really, really, really reel myself back sometimes, because I've definitely had parents who just like, ultimately it's your kid. It is your kid. But if you were paying me to be their coach and you were paying me to see the best that's in your kid, then you need to let me be the coach, and you need to unconditionally love your kid and get out of the way. Yeah.
Parents are the sole reason I never wanted to be a youth coach, because I just don't want to deal with parents at all.
You got to find the rad ones, like my drinking buddies. They're great. So
I'm sure they're out there.
Oh yeah, they're great.
I just didn't want to deal with them.
AKA greatest teen parent ever, Meredith Steele. You're amazing. Her family is great. So they are definitely my buddies. So, so without getting on that tangent, youth coaching is the future of the climbing sport. And I selfishly teach kids to climb because I want to make great human beings. I want them to be great rock climbers, but I also want them to care about the things that I care about in the future. And I don't want to tell them what to believe. I just want to show them my reality. I don't want to show them the things that make me excited. And I think going back to your point of like how Team Texas takes these kids on outdoor rock climbing trips, the coolest thing about rock climbing is going rock climbing, going on a trip, bonding with people, spending these time road trips. Like that is it. And I want to provide that experience on a more simple, smaller level for kids, because I do, with my guiding company, I do a lot of local day trips. And then we've done a couple weekend overnight trips, but for the most part, that's really what we do. And I try to provide that experience for the kids in one day. And it's always so funny. They're all on their iPods and just like, and it's early in the morning, but they're sleepy. And a few of them are talking to their friends. And by the end of every climbing trip or bouldering trip, I cannot get them to shut up in the car.
Right.
And for like 45 minutes, and then they're all asleep.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the coolest things, because it's not rock climbing as a team sport is not like baseball or football where you're all as a unit competing against other units. You're also competing against each other pretty often, you know, and that adds this dynamic that I think is a little tougher to understand.
I think they're also competing against themselves, which we always know this too.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, like that, but that allows them to get such good camaraderie. Like I had a mom who came in from competitive swimming.
And healthy competition.
Yes. So this actually nails the head. So her daughter came from competitive swimming to my team. And then after a practice, she walked up to me pretty emotional, not in tears, but she was like, why is the other team rooting for my kid and the kids on your team to win this boulder? Like, why are they're on the wrong team. Like they shouldn't be rooting for this kid. And I was like, that's not how rock climbing works.
Yeah.
And I told her, I was like, you have to understand. I was like, every kid, none of these kids are thinking about what team they are on. They are looking at them and they are thinking, oh my God, this is how I felt on the third hold. Oh, now they're grabbing the match sloper. Oh, they're messing with it. God, I know how that feels.
Yeah.
And like you immediately emphasize with them. You like it's like I always like use I completely destroy Einstein's theory of relativity, but I was like, it's all relative. Whether you're climbing V5 or V14, like the struggle, the emotional anguish, like all the mental feelings that you're feeling are the same.
Totally.
And every kid, it is very real for them when they're rooting on these kids and they're rooting on them because they're all like, I want you to, like, they want to win, but they want to see you send because if it's possible for you, then it's possible for them. Yeah. And that's why, and the kids know that, like, we don't have to tell them that.
Yeah. That's definitely something I've always appreciated about how the indoor climbing community operates in a similar way that the outdoor community does. You know, yes, we all want to be the first, or we all want to win, or whatever. But it's a fine line you have to balance across when you want to win, but you're also really psyched for your friend who's climbing their best that day and might beat you.
Yeah,
you know, that's.
I love it though, because like I've never seen any of our kids take it personally. They all, like, if someone beats them, like some of them will be a little stinged about it, but almost all of them come up, give each other hugs, and they're too busy talking about like what just happened that day. Yeah. And so I'm really lucky to see that. And I think that's honestly from a competitive reason that's why I've stuck with the sport, because this is like, rock climbing is unlike any other sport I've ever come across in my life. And I played football, a little bit of basketball. I was terrible at it. Wrestling I did for a while. But my main sport was track and field. And I think like track and field is the closest that you come to that. But everyone is so loud cheering for you. You don't know who's cheering for who when you're running across that finish line. You're just trying to get across it.
You were talking about blocks. Were you a sprinter?
So I ran open 8, open 4, 300-meter hurdles. So I was an intermediate sprinter. And my coach would make us start on blocks for the 3 and the 4. And then we had the option to start on blocks for the 8. Never did, but yes. So those were my main events.
Yeah, cool. Track was a similar way. You know, for me, I was a pole vaulter in high school, and my pole vault partner Tellis and I always were battling for who was going to win the meet, you know?
So fun.
And I just have such good memories of that healthy competition, you know, never knowing I could be on today or Tellis could be on fire today. And if he's on fire, I'm losing, period, you know? But it was fun to go in and see and push each other. And, you know, if he was having a bad day, I'd do my best to light his fire and try to get him going.
But like, how cool is that memory? Like, really, like, how cool is that? Because I think other people look in other sports to just think about the people who beat them. They think about the people that they were neck and neck with, and they're like, oh yeah, this guy, this fool. But in like track, definitely, rock climbing, definitely. Like, how cool is it? Like, the person who wins, you're probably buddies with that person, and you're gonna be climbing the same route at the crag, or you're gonna show up to the gym and be working the same project. or back on that same climb if it's indoors from a comp. Like it's the coolest thing in the world that you can just like lose with such grace, but your friendship has honestly been amplified because of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just don't see it anywhere else.
Yeah, it's, losing with grace, I think, is this thing that we misunderstand in a lot of ways. It's that when you say it to me, I don't get a picture of a kid just like totally accepting the loss and being like, oh yeah, that was fine. Because I know there were a lot of emotions tied up in it, and it takes a few minutes, for that to sink in, sometimes longer than a few minutes. But what really counts is that they come back to practice the next session and, congratulate and high five the person who beat them, or just accept that, okay, it's time to get back to work, whatever that is. I just listened to this amazing Sports Wars series on the Williams sisters, and listening to Serena's battles with losing to Venus for years and years, and then even after Serena was the more dominant player, she would still lose to Venus on occasion, and it would tear her up,
That's
but
funny.
ultimately they're like, we're sisters, and that's, you might be my greatest competitor, but you're also my best friend. So
Yeah, that's rad. I think climbing does that. So that's awesome.
I think so. If you had to pick one quality that you think is the most important for a kid to come up through your feeder system into this storied program of Team Texas, what would that quality be? You named several already. Is it one of those? Is it something different? What's the thing that makes a kid most successful? I'm not even a big fan of the word successful, but
I know this is like a big catchword. It was a big buzzword in schools and educations in the last like 2-3 years. I think it's kind of dying down now, but grit. Like that's it. Like you just have to have like, I'm talking like chunky sand in your mouth, grinding your teeth, grit, and knowing that like you're just willing to push through, but grit with intelligence. And I think that's like, grit with patience. That's basically it, because you've got to be able to bear down, but you've also got to have enough patience to be able to just like step back and just be like, okay, I need to learn from this situation. But with most things, I think a lot of kids, and maybe it's just the way they're structured and set up their homes are. But I think a lot of kids, like they'll lose a couple of times, and instead of seeing this loss as an opportunity to learn, be like, when you fall off the boulder, the next question should be, what did you learn? But with most kids, when they fall off the boulder, they're like, I freaking suck.
yeah,
And even though it's so dismissive, it's like, I have one of my kids, Austin, who's actually been doing really, really well.
How many kids in Texas are named after cities in Texas?
Oh my God, I don't even know. I've coached kids named Dallas. Austin.
It's similar in Wyoming. There's all sorts of Codys.
Yeah. Oh no. I'm sure you could Google this and we would both be surprised. But Austin, like in the last year and a half, every time he comes off a boulder, I'm like, Austin, he was like, yeah, man, like I didn't put all 4 fingers on it. And I just like, I realized it right when I brought my foot up, and then I didn't really want to finish the move anyway, but like, I just tried it, and like, I think I can do it next time. And I'm like, thanks for doing my job.
Yeah. Yep.
And like, that's where you're trying to get to. And I think you have to have a certain amount of grit to push yourself through what you think is going to be really sucky, because like you and I both know this, but like rock climbing is a tremendous amount of failure for one moment of success.
Yeah.
And it's just, you have to have grit in order to actually follow through with that, because no kid believes it, no matter how many times I say that statement until I'm blue in the face. None of them to believe it, and I don't need them to believe it. I just need them to stick with the plan. And I think if they'll do that, they will see the fruits of their labor.
Yeah. One of the the key components that Angela Duckworth in her book called Grit, I think that's the title of it, talks about, and I did an episode on this with my friend Emily Tilden, who's an incredible athlete. We talked about grit, and one of the things that matters most for how much grit does this person have is how much they care about the thing they're trying to do. So, just by answering grit, you've already narrowed it down to the kids who really care and, like you said, want to be here. And
you have to want to be there, or I've definitely told kids, like, you need to lie to yourself and tell yourself you deserve to be here.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'll believe it. And, you say that to an 11-year-old.
And even it's not necessarily a lie. Even they may feel like it's a lie, but
yeah, they do.
But they do deserve to be there.
Yeah, what they don't realize is, like, it seems like a lie, but it's actually the truth of the matter. And I don't know. I think we also need to learn how to reward kids and adults too for just having the conversation. Like, if you get to that, if you get that far to the point where you have to actually tell a kid or an adult, like, hey, listen, I need you to just lie to yourself and, like, tell yourself that, like, you're having the greatest day in the world, so you can send this boulder and we can move on. And I think to a certain extent, like, that is a skill set, or that is a thing that, like, you have to have people do, and that is grit. And I don't know, I just don't think people personally unpack that word enough for themselves to put it into perspective. And then they also need to understand that they're going to unpack that word every 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, it's going to constantly change.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I appreciate you sitting down talking about this subject. More and more the climbing world is growing, or at least pre-COVID it was, and hopefully it continues to do so. And there are just more and more kids joining teams, and that's going to necessitate more and more coaches.
Yeah.
And I want to be someone who makes sure that the thing all the coaches are focused on isn't just, am I having them hangboard with the right weight, and is my programming perfect? It's more about, we're building these humans and giving them the qualities and the traits that they can carry forward to become good athletes, good people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the most important part. Because at some point you're not going to be a part of this journey, and your whole goal is to set them up that they can send on their own.
Yep.
Totally. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, man. I appreciate this.
Anytime.
Much like we have always believed here at Power Company Climbing, we're building better humans, not just stronger rock climbers. And I'm happy to know that there are youth coaches out there like Mario, who also follow this same idea, and who know that the lessons they're giving to the people they're coaching are what are going to help them become better humans in the future. You can learn more about Mario at mariostanley.com. You can find his podcast there, Sins and Suffers. You can also find his guiding services. Definitely reach out to Mario. He's an important voice in this community, and you're going to be hearing more from him here at the podcast. If you have not listened to episode 177 with Mario and his friend Dynell Hunter, it'll give you a really amazing view of Mario's mentorship. And it's maybe my favorite episode I've ever recorded. It's certainly the conversation that I felt most privileged to be able to sit and witness. So check that out, episode 177. Also on Mario's podcast, Sins and Suffers, today, same day this is coming out, Mario has an interview with myself. So if you haven't heard me ramble on enough about coaching, you can go over to Sins and Suffers and listen to that conversation as well. In the meantime, you can find us at powercompanyclimbing.com. Like I said in the intro, check out the crag kits and the boulder bags in stock and shipping now. You can also find us on the Instagrams, the Facebooks, at Power Company Climbing, and you can search for us on Twitter. You'll find people talking about us because that's what they do, but you're not going to find us because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time.